My name is Charlotte Morgan, and I live in America. I never thought my life would change so violently in a single afternoon, but it did. That Saturday began with sunlight spilling into my small apartment in Brooklyn, the kind of warm, golden light that makes you believe everything is possible. I woke up early, heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and joy, because it was supposed to be the most important day of my life. My fiancé, Noah Reed, and I were to be married in New York City, in a church surrounded by family, friends, and all the dreams I had carried since childhood. I can still see myself standing before the mirror, adjusting the lace sleeves of my white dress, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. The flowers were delivered just before noon. White roses tied with a silver ribbon, simple but perfect. My mother had loved roses, and even though she was gone, I wanted her presence there with me. When I held the bouquet, I thought of her smile, and I whispered, "Today is for you too, Mom." My hands trembled, but they were trembling with hope, not fear. At least that's what I told myself. The ceremony was set for 2 o'clock. By 1:45, the church was filling up. The pews gleamed under soft light, the air heavy with the perfume of flowers and the faint echo of the organ playing quietly in the background. My bridesmaids whispered encouragements, tugging gently at the hem of my dress to make sure it flowed just right. My heart beat so loud I could hear it in my ears, but every beat carried with it a promise of love, of a house in Brooklyn with ivy climbing its walls, of Sunday walks along the Hudson River, of children who would someday call Noah Dad. When the doors finally opened and I took my first step down the aisle, I saw Noah at the altar. He looked striking in his black suit, tall, dark-haired, the man I thought I would spend forever with. For one perfect moment, it felt like my whole world was glowing, and then it wasn't. Noah's eyes met mine, but instead of love or joy, I saw something else, something hollow. His lips pressed into a hard line. He shook his head once, almost imperceptibly, and then, before I even reached the halfway point, he stepped down from the altar. He didn't run, didn't make a scene. He simply walked past the pastor, past the guests who turned in stunned silence, and right out the wide wooden doors. "I can't," he said. Those were the only words he gave me as he passed, barely more than a whisper. The bouquet slipped from my hand. My knees nearly gave way under the weight of that moment. My father had been absent all my life, my mother long gone, and the one person I thought I could trust had left me, not with a fight, not with an explanation, but with 2 words and a turned back. I heard gasps, felt hands reaching to steady me, but none of it mattered. My life, as I had built it in my mind, had shattered like glass dropped on stone. Afterward, I don't remember much of the ride home. I know my dress felt unbearably heavy, so much so that I tore the veil off before I reached the curb. I remember one of my bridesmaids, Emily, offering to stay with me, but I shook my head. I didn't want comfort. I wanted silence. I wanted the walls of my apartment to close around me and hide me from a city that suddenly felt cruel and foreign. The apartment was just as I had left it that morning, tidy, modest, and small. My rent was $1,200 a month, and every corner had been carefully arranged by me over the years, second-hand furniture polished until it shone, stacks of books I loved, little paintings from street artists I'd met in Manhattan. Normally, it was my safe space, but that night it felt like a box closing in. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in the dress, staring at the white fabric that had cost more than 3 months of my salary at the bookstore where I had worked. It no longer looked like a symbol of joy. It looked like a costume from someone else's life. Hours passed. I didn't cry the way I thought I would. Instead, I felt empty, like all my emotions had been stolen along with my future. Around midnight, unable to sleep, I turned on my laptop. The screen glowed in the dim room, and I opened job listings, not because I was ready to work, but because I needed to feel like there was still a next step. I scrolled through endless posts, clerical work, waitressing, retail jobs. My eyes blurred until one listing caught my attention. Live-in caretaker needed for elderly billionaire. Limited mobility. Discreet. $5,000 per week. I read the post 3 times. $5,000 a week. More money than I had ever imagined earning. The address was listed as upstate New York, near the Hudson River, only a 2-hour train ride away. The agency contact was a woman named Evelyn Shaw. For a moment, I laughed bitterly. From a jilted bride to a caretaker for a billionaire, what kind of turn in life was this? But something inside me shifted as I stared at the screen. Maybe it was anger, maybe desperation, but I wanted distance. I wanted a place where Noah couldn't find me, where the whispers of neighbors and coworkers couldn't reach me. I wanted to build a wall of money and work around myself until I felt whole again. I dialed the number listed. Evelyn answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm, steady, almost too professional, but there was something kind beneath it. She asked for my name, my background, and if I could start on Monday. "I can start tonight," I said without hesitation. By the time I hung up, my decision was sealed. I took off the dress, stuffed it into the closet without looking at it again, and pulled 2 bags from under the bed. I filled one with clothes, the other with books and notebooks, because even in heartbreak, I couldn't abandon the habit of writing. Before leaving, I turned to look once at the apartment. The life I had tried to build here felt like paper in the rain, soft, ruined, and impossible to hold on to. At 2 a.m., I was on a nearly empty train heading north. The city lights fell away behind me, and the dark fields and forests of upstate America stretched out ahead. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass window, breathing slowly. I told myself this wasn't about love anymore, not about weddings or broken promises. This was about survival. This was about money and movement, about building a new life, dollar by dollar, breath by breath. And though I didn't know it then, it was also the night I began walking toward the truth of who I really was and the secret waiting for me in the house on the river. The train pulled into the station just after 9 in the evening. The air was colder here than in the city, sharp and clean, tinged with the scent of pine. I stepped off the platform with both bags dragging at my sides, nerves humming in my chest. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten much since Noah left me standing in white lace and silence, but there I was, beginning again in the shadow of strangers. A black sedan waited at the curb. A woman stood beside it, tall, slender, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything about me in a single glance. She wore her blonde hair short, neat, and a dark coat cinched at the waist. On her finger was a ring shaped like a silver knot, understated but elegant. "Charlotte Morgan?" she asked. "Yes," I said, setting down one bag. "I'm Evelyn Shaw," she said. "I run things for Mr. Hart. You'll find the house quiet, but I hope you'll come to see it as a safe place. Please get in." The leather seats smelled faintly of cedar. The car hummed softly as we drove away from the station, headlights cutting through tall trees that seemed to whisper against one another in the wind. For nearly half an hour we drove through winding country roads. Every mile we put between me and New York felt strange, half like freedom, half like exile. Finally, the road widened and the trees parted. There it was, the Hart estate, a wide stone house, massive but not loud, with green shutters and a long porch that stretched like open arms. The Hudson River glittered in the distance, moonlight tracing its rippling surface. The house looked less like a home and more like a ship anchored on land, standing watch over the water. "This is Hart House," Evelyn said, her voice quiet, almost reverent. "Mr. Hart spends most of his days inside now. He can speak, though it costs him strength. He cannot walk without help, so patience and calm are everything here. Do you understand?" "Yes," I answered, though inside, I wasn't sure what I understood at all. We stepped inside, and the air changed instantly. It smelled of lemon oil and old books, the kind of scent that clings to history itself. The polished wood floors glowed under soft lamplight. The silence wasn't heavy, it was deliberate, like the house had chosen stillness as its companion. A nurse appeared in the hallway, her steps gentle. She introduced herself as Maria Alvarez, her voice carrying a quiet steadiness. She led me to the guest room where I would sleep. The walls were pale blue, the bedding crisp, and a small bell was fixed to the wall. "If he needs you at night, you'll hear this," Maria explained, touching the bell. "He wakes at odd hours. Don't be alarmed." I nodded, running my hand along the coverlet as if anchoring myself to something solid. When she left, I wandered the hall a little, my suitcase still by the door. The walls were lined with photographs, most from business gatherings, men in dark suits, women in elegant dresses, the bright towers of American cities in the background. I passed images of William Hart shaking hands, cutting ribbons, standing beside senators and mayors. But then one photo stopped me cold. It was a winter scene, the river frozen in the background. A young woman stood in a red scarf, her smile soft but alive with secrets. I froze because she looked so much like my mother, Harper. The same brown eyes, the same curve of cheek. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. My mother had died when I was 16, and she had never moved in circles like these. She worked in a diner, kept our lives stitched together with worn hands and long shifts. What would her face be doing here, caught in the company of billionaires? I told myself it was only resemblance, nothing more.
People look alike.
That's all. Still, my skin prickled as I followed Maria toward the study. "Wait here," she said. "The doctor is with him now." I sat in a leather chair, my hands clasped in my lap. I thought of Noah for the first time since boarding the train, his retreating back, his voice saying, "I can't." It hurt less out here, with walls that weren't soaked in memories of us. But the wound was still raw. When the doctor left, Evelyn returned and guided me toward the master bedroom. The air inside was warm, the hum of a heater steady. The curtains were drawn back just enough for moonlight to spill across the bed. And there he was, William Hart, the man whose name I had seen etched into skyscrapers in New York, whose empire of steel and ships had been written about in magazines I could never afford. Once, he had been the titan of America, and now he lay still as stone, his hair pure white, his body softened and thinned by time. Tubes connected to a quiet machine traced lines into his arm. He looked like a cliff after years of rain, still towering, but worn by storms. "Good evening, Mr. Hart," Evelyn said, her voice gentle. "This is Charlotte." Slowly, his gaze lifted to mine. His eyes were pale blue, faded yet piercing, as though they had seen too much and carried every ounce of it. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted it from the blanket, a fragile motion that still felt commanding. I stepped closer. His lips parted, and his voice was barely more than a whisper. "You look like someone I knew in another life." My heart gave a sudden, sharp ache. The word struck somewhere I didn't want touched. I reminded myself, this is a job. You're here to work, to earn money, to move forward. I told myself to think of the numbers. $5,000 every week, paid on Fridays. Enough to buy time, enough to buy peace, enough to drown out the echo of the church doors closing behind me. Yet still, his eyes lingered on my face as though I carried an answer he had long been searching for. "Come closer, Charlotte," Evelyn said softly, as if guiding both of us. I did. His hand brushed mine, and for a fleeting second, I felt the strange pull of something I couldn't name. I told myself again, this is only a job, only work, only money. But as the silence stretched between us, I wondered if perhaps I had stepped into a house that would change everything I thought I knew, not only about my future, but about my past. The bell rang at precisely 2:14 a.m., a sharp, chiming sound that pierced the silence of the guest room. I shot upright in bed, heart racing, unsure for a moment where I was. Then the memory returned. The train, the stone house, the man in the wide bed whose pale eyes had searched mine as if I carried an answer he had been waiting for all his life. I pulled on my sweater and hurried down the hallway, the wood floor cool beneath my bare feet. The house seemed even larger at night, its silence deeper, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. When I entered Mr. Hart's room, the curtains were wide open, revealing the Hudson River outside. Under the faint moon, the water looked like a sheet of glass cracked with silver lines. He was awake, his breathing slow and rough. His lips parted. "Water," he whispered. I brought the glass to his mouth. His hand lifted weakly, brushing my fingers, light as moth wings. For a moment, I almost pulled back. It was too intimate, too strange, but I steadied myself and tilted the glass until he sipped. When he settled back against the pillows, I asked, "Would you like music?" He nodded, his eyes glimmering faintly in the pale light. On the sideboard sat an old record player, polished wood with brass dials. I chose the first record my hand found, slid it into place, and let the needle fall. A soft wave of jazz filled the room, saxophone low and slow, the kind of music that curled around the air like smoke in a dim bar. It was strangely comforting. I turned to straighten the shelves. That was when I noticed a small velvet-lined box, half open, tucked between books. I reached for it instinctively. "May I close this?" I asked, thinking it had been left untidy. His voice, though faint, carried insistence. "Open it." So I did. Inside was a locket, simple and golden, with a tiny catch that clicked as I pulled it open. And then I froze. On one side was a photograph of a young woman in a summer dress, smiling as the wind lifted her brown hair. Her eyes, my eyes, looked back at me. It was my mother, Harper. The other side showed a younger William Hart, tall, handsome, bright with ambition. Between their faces was a pressed blue flower, preserved as carefully as if it were treasure. My fingers trembled so hard I almost dropped the locket. "Where did you get this?" My voice shook. His gaze did not move from the locket. "From Harper," he said. "From the woman I loved and lost." The world tilted under me. My knees felt weak. "Harper Morgan?" His eyes closed for a moment, as if the name itself was a weight he had carried too long. Then he nodded. "Harper Morgan. She lived in America all her life. We met in Chicago, one spring long ago. She left without a word. I searched. I failed." I could hear my own pulse thundering in my ears. The jazz swirled in the background, the river glimmered beyond the window, and yet I was no longer in that room. I was back in my childhood, remembering the way my mother's gaze sometimes drifted far away, as if part of her was living a secret I could never reach. "Harper was my mother," I whispered. His eyes opened, pale blue, wet with unshed tears. His hand lifted, trembling, reaching toward me as though the truth had pulled him back to life. "Then you are Charlotte." "Yes," I said, my voice breaking. The silence that followed was heavier than words. In that moment, I was no longer simply the abandoned bride of New York. I was a daughter, unexpectedly standing before a father I had never known. I was both broken and remade, and the two truths collided so fiercely inside me I could hardly stand. "I didn't know," I said, clutching the locket. "No one told me. My mother never said." He drew a deep, ragged breath. "I sent letters. I sent money, $200 at first, then more as I could, and later so much more. They came back unopened. Every one. I thought she hated me. Still, I kept hoping." Tears blurred my vision. I wanted to scream, to ask why he had not come himself, why he had allowed decades to pass. I wanted to collapse into his chest, to feel the father I had missed since the day I was born. But I did none of those things. I stood frozen, the locket burning cold in my palm, the weight of truth pressing me to the floor. At last, I forced the words out. "I'm here now." He smiled faintly, weary but grateful, as if those 3 words were enough to bind together the years of silence. His hand, fragile as paper, rested on mine for only a moment before falling back. The music played on, slow and haunting, as the night stretched forward. I sat by his bedside in the low lamplight, staring at the locket, listening to the rise and fall of his breathing. A storm of questions crowded my mind. Why had my mother hidden him from me? Why had she carried the weight of secrecy instead of sharing the truth? Was it protection, or pride, or pain? I thought of my childhood, the lean years when rent was always a struggle, when my mother worked double shifts at the diner, and I wore shoes patched together with tape. If he had been sending money, where had it gone? Had she refused it on purpose, or had she never told me to shield me from him? The answers lay with a woman already gone, buried in a small American cemetery far from this house of stone and power. I would never know, but what I did know, with piercing clarity, was that my life had just shifted. Noah's betrayal, sharp as it was, seemed smaller now in the shadow of this revelation. My story was no longer about the man who left me at the altar. It was about the man lying in this bed, my father, who had returned to me not through choice, but through the slow decay of time. I stayed until dawn. When his eyes finally closed in sleep, I closed the locket and set it gently back in the velvet box. I whispered, "Good night, Dad," though the words still felt foreign on my tongue. As I walked back to my room, the house seemed different, less like a stranger's fortress, more like a place where hidden truths could finally breathe. The river outside glimmered with first light, carrying secrets of its own, endless and unknowable. I lay down on the bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had come here chasing money, thinking $5,000 a week would be the lifeline I needed. But what I had found in the quiet hours of the night was something money could never buy, a missing piece of myself, and though I didn't know how the days ahead would unfold, I knew one thing for certain. I would not leave him. Not now, not when time was so short, and not when fate had finally delivered us back to each other. Morning came pink and clean, the kind of dawn that makes even sorrow pause for breath. I sat at the small table near the kitchen window while Evelyn poured coffee into a porcelain cup and Maria set down eggs and toast. The house felt changed, as though the very walls had loosened some secret they had been keeping for decades. I wasn't only a caretaker anymore. I was a daughter, finally seen. I carried the breakfast tray into his room. He was awake, propped against pillows, eyes brighter than the night before. He studied me the way a painter studies a canvas, carefully, reverently, as if afraid one blink might erase me. "Tell me about your life," he said. And so I did. I told him about New York, about the bookstore where I had worked for $18 an hour, how the smell of old paper and ink had been my comfort during lonely years. I told him about my love for small paintings and antique maps, how I would walk down side streets just to peer at window displays I could never afford. I even told him about Noah, the wedding that had never been, the sharp taste of failure I couldn't wash out of my mouth. He listened to every word, his thin hands folded on the blanket. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said softly, "I'm sorry, but maybe it led you here." Later that day, his lawyer arrived. James Porter, a man in his early 50s with calm hands and the kind of voice that carried reassurance without effort. He came up from the city every few weeks, but today his visit was about more than legal work, it was about transition. He spread papers across the study desk, asked me to sign forms granting me rights to make medical decisions if needed. He asked if I had any requests, any needs of my own. "My needs are simple," I told him.
Time, truth,
"And a way to stand on my own 2 feet. He nodded as though he understood. He didn't press. The days slipped into rhythm after that. In the mornings I read aloud to my father. Yes, the word finally felt true, from books about the river towns of America. He loved stories of industry and growth, of bridges built and ships launched. In the afternoons, I pushed his chair out onto the wide porch so he could feel the wind off the Hudson. He would close his eyes, and for a little while I could imagine him as the man in those photographs, strong, commanding, full of life. At times, he spoke of his past. He told me about the first $50,000 he ever made, the night he signed a contract in a Chicago hotel that opened the door to his empire. He spoke of the steel mills, of midnight deals struck with a handshake, of the $3 billion that newspapers said he was worth now. But then his voice would falter, and he would admit what all the money could not buy. "The one deal I wish I had not lost," he said one evening as the sun fell over the river, "was a life with Harper, and the child I never held." I sat beside him, silent, letting the weight of his words settle between us like evening mist. There was no undoing the years, but there was presence now, and sometimes that is enough. One night, as the last streaks of gold faded over the Hudson, he pressed something into my palm. "The locket." "This is yours," he said. His breath came shallow, but his gaze held mine steady. And there is a fund. Not a fortune, but enough. $750,000, held in your name. I stared at him, stunned. Use it for a home. Use it for art. Use it to choose the life that was once chosen for you, he said, pausing to gather air into his lungs. Tears slid hot down my face. Thank you, I whispered, my throat tight. But I'm not here for money. His lips curved in the faintest smile. I know. That is why I can give it. He died on a quiet Sunday morning. Jazz played low from the record player, the same song from the first night I arrived. The window was open, and the sound of the river drifted in. His hand was in mine when he took his last breath, his eyes soft and calm, as if he had been waiting for me before he could let go. Good night, Dad, I whispered. The word still felt new, but it fit, and I would carry it always. The funeral was held in New York City, in a grand church filled with people who had known him only as William Hart the Billionaire, not as the man who had finally become my father. I sat near the front, listening to the hymns, holding the locket in my hand. The world remembered him for his empire. I remembered him for the way he had looked at me in the quiet hours, eyes full of recognition and regret, and for the peace we had found at last. Afterward, I made a choice. I used part of the inheritance to buy a small brick house in a river town for $420,000. Modest compared to the mansion I had just left, but it was mine. The porch faced west, so I could watch the sunsets. I painted the front door blue. Maria came to visit on weekends, bringing laughter and warmth. Evelyn sent me messages that always ended with, "Proud of you." James helped me set up a charity in Mr. Hart's name, a fund for caretakers and home nurses across America. We started with $250,000 and a long list of homes that needed help. Months later, a letter came in the mail. From Noah. His handwriting was the same, neat and deliberate. He wrote that he had made a mistake, that he missed me, that perhaps we could meet for coffee and talk. I stared at the letter for a long time. Once, those words would have split me open with hope. But not now. Not after the river house. Not after finding a father. Not after learning that broken things can be remade in unexpected ways. I wrote back one line. I wish you well. Nothing more, and that was enough. Now I tell the story in simple words because it is a simple truth. I was broken in New York, but I found a different kind of love in a stone house on the river. I lost a wedding, but I gained a father. I thought money would mend me, but it was not money that filled the cracks. It was time. It was care. It was a golden locket carrying both my mother's face and my father's. Sometimes, at dusk, I sit on my porch with Jazz playing softly through the windows. I hold the locket in my palm, feeling the cool weight of it. The river moves endlessly, the house stands firm, and the sky turns gold before giving way to night. My name is Charlotte Morgan. I am from America. And this life, born of heartbreak and Harper, is the one I chose.